Hello everybody! In this video, I'm going to talk about intonation and what you can do to improve it. Now before we get started, let's define the word intonation, because if you're a completely new musician, you may not have even heard of the word before. So what we mean by intonation is whether or not your notes are in tune. With instruments like the violin, there's no frets, so where your fingers land, it could be anywhere. They could be in the exact spots they need to be for the notes to be in tune, or they could be wrong. So let's talk about how you know whether or not your notes are in tune or out of tune. Because for brand new musicians, you haven't started training your ears yet, and you don't really know what to watch out for yet. So let's play your third finger on A in order to play the note D. And let's play it together with our open D string. So now that is a beautiful in-tune note. It sounds very even. Now if the note is out of tune, you're going to hear this beating or wah 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 sound. So it's going to sound like this. You hear that sort of wah wah wah. So that's what it sounds like when it's flat. And now if I fix it by pushing my finger up until it equals out, you'll be able to hear that difference. So that's what you look for with octaves, and then it'll be the same way with perfect fifths. So this is really good for you to train your ears in order to tune your violin by ear, because your strings are in perfect fifths. Let's take, how about my open A and E string. If I change my tuning so it's out of tune, see, that doesn't sound very nice, right? So that is too flat. So now we want to adjust my E until it evens out with my A string. There. Basically, for every interval you hear, you want to be able to hear the difference between it being kind of icky sounding. Listen for that sort of evening out, making it sound nice and pretty. So now that we have defined what intonation is, I'm going to talk a bit about how to improve your intonation on the violin. Now, my first tip is to play on the piano, or if you don't have a piano, use a piano app, like I have right here. So now let's say we're working on Mary Had a Little Lamb. So I would first play it on my piano. The main thing with this is getting the correct sound, the correct pitch into your ears, so you know exactly what it's supposed to sound like before you try playing it on an instrument where your intonation could be wrong. What I suggest in order to help you get that sound into your ears is to sing along to it. And you don't have to have the best singing voice. Just do the best you can and try to match your voice to the pitches. So this would be or if you're playing any other generic piece that doesn't have any words, you can sing it on any sort of a vowel. And then try to sing it without the piano. So now, in order to try to recite it and get those pitches, making sure they're in your head and making sure that you're able to reproduce them easily. So that's my starting note. And check again to make sure your voice is in tune. Now, I know this sounds like I'm training your voice instead of training you for violin, but really it does help a lot to first sing, because you need to be able to know what the notes are before you're able to play them on the violin. This is anticipation, so anticipating your playing rather than just reacting to your playing. And then once you have the notes in your ears, you try to play it on your violin. First of all, when you're practicing, practice very slowly, so that way you can hear each note as clearly as possible, and you have time to fix your notes if you need to fix them. The other thing is, do not use vibrato when you're practicing in order to fix your intonation. Okay, because when you're vibrating, you're changing the pitch, and we want to be absolutely sure that the notes are in tune before we start wobbling around with the pitches. So my example was Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? So that starts on A. Let's use fourth finger A. And let's say, for instance, I'm not sure about that note. So I would play it on my piano. And remember what it sounded like. So that is a little bit off. That's better. Right? So that's just an example of how you would practice with it slowly. Let's say you're really unsure, keep checking back in with your keyboard for what the notes are in between you're playing with the violin. So it would be kind of like this. Etc., etc. The other thing to watch out for on your violin is the resonant notes. Your resonant notes are any note on the violin that has the letter name G, D, A, and E. So the same as your open strings. So with these notes, they're going to ring out more on your violin than the other notes. It just happens naturally because the other strings, your open strings, will vibrate in sympathy. So let's, for example, the A. I'll play it with my third finger. See how this string is vibrating when I'm playing on my D string? So you're watching out for those extra ringing notes. With the notes that are on strings that are right next to each other, you can play it as a double stop. But if you're not so good at double stops yet with your bow, just do it separate bowing. And now when it comes to open strings, it's not only the same letter name notes that you can check. Those are just the easiest ones for you to check. Now, let's say, for an example, I'm playing Exercises by Schradek. I'll have a link for the exact exercises that I'm referring to down below. The very first one is just this. Now, I'm not warmed up, so that could be way out of tune at the moment. So let's check that against my open D string. So what I'm listening for is the different intervals with my droning D string in order to match my fingers against the D. Like that. And you can do this with any of your open strings. And if, let's say, you're playing a really tricky passage, or you're not very good at playing double stops with your bow, another way to check with this is with your piano. So what you would do is play the drone on your piano and hit the sustain pedal in order to let that note ring out. Of course, I don't have a piano with me, so what I do is I use an app. Now, I'm not sponsored by this application or anything, but this is just the one that I use. It's called Pitch Perfect here. And I'll have a link for this app in the description as well. So what you do is you can tap on any of the notes on the screen and it will play a drone. And you don't have to do an open string drone as well. You can drone any other note. So let's say I'm trying to practice the B major scale, right? So in that case, we want to drone the B. Or if you're playing on a piano, you won't want to play the B major chord. Sometimes playing with a whole chord is easier for your ears than just one note drone. But in the case of the app, I'm going to play just the one note, the B. So there's my B, and I'm going to practice the B major scale, which is really tricky because it really stretches the hand out on the violin. So that's flat, so I want to match that perfect fifth with the B. That's a bit sharp. There, now that's in tune. So you can use any of these exercises with any of your pieces. So when you are picking out notes to drone underneath your pieces, you want to make sure that you're droning either the tonic note of whatever piece your key is in, the tonic being like if you're in D major, your tonic would be D, or the piece could be modulating throughout, right? So you need to know the key that you're in and what your sort of baseline notes are. Those notes within the chord progression, your bass notes, may actually be a better note to drone as you go along in your piece. And it's really important to, of course, practice your scales and your arpeggios and your studies and any other sort of exercises like Schreidek in order to really reinforce your finger spacings on the violin in order to get your fingers correct. And one of the most important things to remember is so far what I've talked about is being able to hear when the note is wrong and then fixing it. But if you want to really improve your intonation, you can't stop there. So let's say I'm playing a scale, A major, and I'm checking my notes and I'm making sure my notes are in tune. So right there, I just fixed my first finger, right? But don't go on to the next note. I fixed it, and now I'm thinking, really pay attention to how that feels in your hand. And really pay attention to what it sounds like within the context of whatever scale or piece you are working on, right? So you want to really pay attention to the sound and how it feels. And you want to make sure you play it correctly before you move on to the next notes, right? Otherwise, you're just reinforcing a bad habit of first playing the note wrong and then fixing it. Eventually, we want to get it to the point where you're playing the note correctly the first time around, right? So we want to keep going over the right note a few times to get that repetition in. That's wrong. That's right. So we go back. That's right again. We do it again. We're reinforcing the good habit. And now let's go back to the beginning of the scale to make sure that we're working up our way to it correctly. Oh, that's wrong again. So let's fix it. Okay, I'm I'm listening to it, I'm feeling how it feels in my hand. And making sure that you're able to play it correctly at least 3 to 5 times before you move on. That's good. Now let's say you have done all this work and you think you're playing in tune. Well, a really good thing to do in order to check is to record yourself. When you're playing the violin, there's many things that your brain is doing all at once. And you could be thinking that you're paying all this attention to your intonation, but then when you watch the audio recording again, you realize, oh, there's actually a few notes that were out of tune all along and I didn't even realize it. So you check your audio recording and write down on your music what notes you're getting wrong, and then go over your pieces again. Now, my last piece of advice is to do some ear training exercises, like interval identification. So there's a few different websites that do tests for this, or apps. Again, I'm not sponsored for this, but here's this app that I have used in the past to test my ear training. And what it does is it plays an interval, and then you try to guess what that interval is. To me, that sounds like "Oh Canada." Oh Canada. So that would be a minor third. And it was correct. It made that little ding sound. So that was all my tips and tricks for how to improve your intonation on the violin. If this video helped you out, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.